and we see how much he loves us. The devotion to the Sacred Heart began probably, I think we can safely say, with St. John at the Last Supper as he reclined on the chest of Christ. But she is really the one. St. Catherine is really the one who began the more modern version of this, because she herself, even before Margaret Mary Alacoque, even before St. Faustina, began this devotion to the Sacred Heart. As she says, we climb the side of Christ. We look into his heart and we see how it beats for love with you and me. And it is in that heart that we begin to be illumined by the love of God. And we ourselves take that illumination and we give it to the people around us. In a sense, and I'm not quoting any of these three saints here, we become sort of like the moon. The moon doesn't produce its own light, but it is given the light of the sun. And that moon captures the light of the sun and it gives it out to the people. It gives it out to all of us. And it captures it and tempers it. And when we are illuminated by the sight of Christ, if we are really willing to peer into his heart and see how much he loves us, that love will be reflected from us to the people around us. It's my hope that during this weekend you take some time to sit and to look into the heart of Jesus Christ. To sit and to see how much he loves you. And to make sure that you understand that there's nothing you can do, that you have to do to earn God's love. And there's nothing that you can do to lose it. Because he will always, always, always open his side for us. And love us. And the last thing that happens is that as we cross this great bridge, according to Catherine, we come to his mouth. And in his mouth, he whispers into us the words of salvation. And he says to us how much he loves us. And he unites himself with us in his word and in his action and in his love and in his deed. And here's the really amazing thing. This is what happens. This is what happens at Mass. Is we come and we ask God for his mercy. He tells us in the Word of God, in the Scripture that we proclaim, how much he loves us and how much he redeems us. And then he opens his side and we partake of his body and his blood. See what happens when things are separated. You'll notice that you'll never see the priest consecrating the bread and the wine at the same time, even in the Eastern rites. They put them together at the end, but when they consecrate them differently at the different time. Because if you separate my body from my blood, do you know what happens to me? I die. Every single time we come to the Mass, he tells us how much he loves us. He lets us know that we are forgiven. And then he separates his body and his blood. And he puts it back together in unity and love for us. And so when we climb the bridge, when we cross this bridge of Jesus Christ, when we climb the bridge of the cross, both with each other and with God, we become united in him. And that bridge that is celebrated every single day as Catholics, everywhere around the world, and millions of altars everywhere, is the Eucharist itself. And so may you cross this bridge at times. May you have Jesus whisper into your ear during this weekend how much he loves you. May he open his heart to you. And may you also purge whatever it might be that is separating you from accepting the love of God, or whatever it is that is preventing you from loving another person, or what is preventing you from loving yourself. Know that you cannot love without first receiving love. And may you receive that on this weekend. May you bask in it. And may you enjoy the great flood of God's love that he gives each and every one of you. Teresa of Avila has a little bit different of a take on this. And Teresa of Avila, of course, is the Spanish Carmelite in the 16th century. And this is another thing. This is another aspect of looking at this. Is I want you to really focus on the fact that this is a weekend of grace. And she says it's sort of like a garden. Our hearts are kind of like gardens in the sense that they need water and they need sunlight and they need goodness. And she says there's a variety of ways that we can get that water. And she says the first way is that we can go to the well and pull up the water and pour the water onto the plants, which is a lot of work for very little water. Or she says we can design some kind of irrigation, and that, of course, means that we're getting a little closer to God, that we're designing a way in our life that grace may flow through us. Or she says the best way to get water to a garden is when the heavens open up and all of the rain comes pouring down, and you don't have to do anything. And that is what I'm hoping that this weekend becomes for you, is a deluge of God's love. That you may be covered and drowned in the love of God. That you may not have to drown in the sin or the worries of the world, but that you may come here and be covered in His love and in His mercy. Let's read this quote at the bottom of page 2. The beginner must realize that in order to give delight to the Lord, he is starting to cultivate a garden with very barren soil, full of abominable weeds. His Majesty pulls up the weeds and plants good seed. That's the purgation, by the way. Let us now keep in mind all of this is already done by the time a soul is determined to practice prayer and has begun to make use of it. And with the help of God, he must strive like good gardeners to get these plants to grow, and to take pains to water them so that they don't wither but come to bud and flower, and give forth a most pleasant fragrance to provide refreshment for this Lord of ours. Then he will come to take delight in this garden and find his joy among these virtues. But let us see how it must be watered so that they may understand what they have to do. Labor this will cost us, whether the labor is greater than the gain, for how long it must last. It seems the garden can be watered in 4 ways. They may draw water from the well, which is for us a lot of work. Or you can get it by means of a water wheel and aqueducts in such a way that it is obtained by turning a crank of the water wheel. I have drawn it in this way sometimes. The method involves less work than the other, and you get more water. Or it may flow from a river or a stream. The garden is watered much better by this means because the ground is more fully soaked, and there's no need to water it so frequently, and much less work for the gardener. Or the water may be provided by a great deal of rain. For the Lord waters the garden without any work on our part, and this way is incomparably better with all the others mentioned. Now then, these 4 ways of drawing water in order to maintain the garden, because without water it will die, are all important to me and have seemed applicable in explaining the 4 degrees of prayer, in which the Lord in his goodness has sometimes placed my soul. Beginners in prayer, we can say, are those who draw water from the well. This involves a lot of work on their own, as I have said. They must tire themselves in trying to recollect their senses. Since they are accustomed to being distracted, this recollection requires much effort. They need to be accustomed to caring nothing at all about what is seeing or hearing, to practicing the hours of prayer, and thus to solitude and withdrawal, and to thinking of their past life. Although these beginners and the others as well must reflect upon their past, the extent to which they must do varies. In the beginning, such reflection is even painful. This again is purgation. For they do not fully understand what they must understand whether or not they are repentant of their sins. If they are, then they are determined to serve God earnestly. They must strive to consider the life of Christ, and the intellect grows weary in doing this. These are the things we can do ourselves with the understanding that we do so by the help of God. For without this help, as is already known, we cannot have so much as a good thought. These things make up the beginning of fetching water from the well, and please God that it may be things that may be found. At least we are doing our part. If we are already drawing it out, doing what we can to water these flowers. God is so good that when for these reasons his majesty knows perhaps for our greater benefit, the well is dry and we, like good gardeners, do what lies in our power. He sustains the garden without water and makes virtues grow. Here by water I'm referring to tears. And when there are no tears, to interior tenderness and feelings of devotion. But what he will do here sees that after many days there is nothing but dryness and distaste and vapidness, and very little desire to come to water. So is the desire to do this, that if he doesn't recall doing the things he serves, and so the pleasure of the Lord in the garden, he will abandon everything. It will frequently happen to him that even he will be unable to lift his arms for the work and unable to get a good thought. This discursive work with the intellect is what is meant by fetching water from the well. So at the beginning of prayer, it can be very tedious work. And in fact, it is never enough on our part. It is in fact God that begins to flood us with the water. It is God that gives us the grace. And what I hope again happens for you this weekend is that you sit and you allow God to flood you with his water. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to draw water from the well yourself. The fact that you are here is a sign that God's grace is already rooting up in you all the things that prevent life from growing. And further, he is watering you with his great water of salvation, love, and peace. I'll let you read the rest of that as he begins to give you this idea of watering the garden. Finally, at the end here, St. Therese of Lisieux.